concept of Truma Lishma, Ve'yichuli Lishma. What does it mean? Ve'yichuli Truma. Rashi says very famously that when the Bnei Yisrael were asked to donate Ve'yichuli Truma, it says Li Lishmi. Rashi says that based on the Medrash Tanchuma, that it has to be done Lishma, has to be done for the right purpose, for the Shem Hashem, right? So if try and understand this on a deeper level, and we know this idea of v'yichu famously is right, taking, right, but really they're giving, right? Because the idea being that the giving is the taking, right? That is how it is. You give in this context. You give something to a spiritual purpose. That's how you receive something. But the Ramban, if you like, sets the tone and sets the scene here for the Mishkan as a whole, and it's important to see, I think, this Rashi in that context. Ramban is the very beginning of the parsha. He says, as an introduction, really, to the whole of this half of the almost it seems to this half of Sefer Shmos, the whole idea of the Mishkan. He says, "Kasher diber Hashem im Yisrael, ponim v'fonim aseres hadibros." When Hashem spoke to the Bnei Yisrael face to face with the aseres hadibros, v'tziva osom al yidei Moshe ketzas mitzvos, and through Moshe he commanded them certain mitzvos. Shem k'mei ovos l'mitzvos shel Torah. They were like the head categories of all the mitzvahs of the Torah. As we conduct ourselves with Gerim who come to convert, the same idea. We teach them firstly the main things. Yisrael accept upon themselves to do everything that Moshe commanded them to do. Calls it, and he made the covenant with them on this. So this is what has transpired until this point, Yisrael and Mishpatim, because the end of Mishpatim is the description of the bris, of the covenant that took place before Matan Torah. It's the end of which is all we finish. That's how it goes in terms of the psukim of the Torah. Me'atzo now, hinehim loy la'am, v'hu lohem leilokim. Kashes ne'moy mitzchilo. The condition that he made with them has now been created. The relationship is forged between Hashem and the Bnei Yisrael. That's what the idea was. The fulfillment, he says, of the pasuk, "Va'atoim shomaya tishmu b'koili u'shmartem es brisi v'yisem li segula," and you will be to me as a segula, as a treasured people. V'homar, and it says, "Va'atem tiyulim mamleches kohanim v'goy kodesh." You shall be a mamleches kohanim, a kingdom of kohanim, and a goy kodesh, a holy nation. So you notice the emphasis on both of these psukim. The Rambam doesn't say this, but the emphasis on both of these psukim is the common denominator. There is the word li, v'yisem li segula, and you will be to me as a segula. You will be to me. There is the concept of a relationship. That is what is going on, right? That is what is going on. And that links, I think, with this Rashi, to concretize, to solidify, and to really forge and continue building that relationship is the idea of giving. And the idea of giving, particularly in the context of building the Mishkan. And the Ramban then sets out why the Mishkan appears here. Because of their lofty spiritual level, therefore that's why it's fitting they have a Mishkan to rest the Shekhinah amongst them. That's why he commanded first about the Mishkan, that there should be a home sanctified for his name. They would speak to Moshe and command the Bnei Yisrael. So what I think we see here is the idea of the notion of a relationship. The li lishmi, the idea of taking, and the idea of the contributions being made l'shem Hashem, links very closely to that continuum of the building of the relationship with the Kodesh Baruch. Now the Ramban goes on to say something else, which links to a very powerful idea in the Kerem HaTzvi. The Ramban says, "V'nei ikar ha'chefetz b'mishkan, v'mokom menuchas hashchina shu ha'oren." Right? The main purpose of the Mishkan is the place for the Shekhinah to rest, Shu Ha'aron. Everything is focused, says the Ramban, on the Aron. That Hashem would speak from on top of the roof lid of the Aron. So in other words, because this is of the highest level, that's why the description of the Aron precedes all others. And next to them is the Aron and the Shulchan and the Menorah, because next to the Aron is the Shulchan and the Menorah, which are also Kalim like them. They teach about the fundamental purpose of the Mishkan, for which purpose the Mishkan was created for them. He says that Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, as we know, in Vayakel actually produces the Mishkan before the Kelim, and so did B'Tzalel, because at the end of the day, there needed to be a home for it first. But in terms of the priority, the Aron comes first. Preeminent, exactly. Now the Kerem Tzvi Shverber says, he picks up on if you look at an interesting would seem to be an interesting difference between the Aron and all of the other Kelim. The Aron is described, the words the Torah uses for the Aron, the words that introduce the section is V'asu Aron Atzei Shittim, and they shall make an Aron of Atzei Shittim, right? V'asisa Menorahs Zahav Tahar, you shall make a menorah of Zahav Tahar, right? Okay, and then similarly with the Shulchan as well. V'asisa Shulchan Atzei Shittim, you shall make a Shulchan Atzei Shittim, and when it goes into the structure as well, right after that, V'asa Mishkan Ta'aseh, you shall make. So only with the Aron do we have V'asu, and they shall make. What is the difference? And Tzvi Shverber says like this. Why is it in the plural? He says because every detail and aspect of the Aron and the construction of the Aron is meant to point to the relationship that we have with the Torah and how we're supposed to build that relationship. He says that Chazal say that famously the Torah is not me'eva layomhu. It is not found with those who engage themselves in more and more sort of earthly pursuits. In other words, that's what it means in terms of those who go to the other side of the sea on business or whatever. Not that's wrong, but just that if a person thinks that's the route to the Torah, then of course that is not the way it is. Not everyone who increases in business is going to become wise. It's much harder to merit the completion of the Torah like a Talmid Chacham. Okay, but he says the problem is also in the reverse. A Talmid Chacham is also got a problem because with the Torah alone, he won't be able to live in Kemach Ein Torah, right? So there's a problem both ways, if you like, okay? And therefore he says, Matov Ma'anoim Sheves Achim Gem Yocham. The idea of Yisachar and Zvulun, the partnership, okay, that exists. He goes on to explain actually the bracha Bori Nefoshos. Why does it say Bori Nefoshos Rabos V'Chesronom? Why does we emphasize the fact that Hashem created many living things and they are lacking, right? The chesronim. So the idea is everyone has a chesron. This one is missing parnasa and this one is missing Torah, and the tachlis, the purpose, what they're all pointing towards is the hachiyos nefesh kol chai, that ultimately they will all be sustained by coming together. Nefesh kol chai, everyone will be sustained because the one who learns Torah will be supported, right? And the one who is involved in derech eretz in olam hazeh, in that way, in earning a living, will have the zechus of the Torah only through working together in a partnership, right? And therefore he says, that's why it says v'asu oron, and they shall make an oron, because the Torah that is placed in the oron has to work through partnership. It cannot work through one person. You shall make a menorah. You shall make a shulchan. For the Aron to succeed in its purpose, it has to be the plural, because in order to acquire the Torah, you have to work in partnership. And therefore, that's why it's in the plural. And he says that's also the meaning, again, going further into the specifics of the description of the Aron. Why is it V'tzipi soyoso zahav tahar, right? Same pasuk, right? Next pasuk. That's right. Pasuk Yudalef. You shall cover it with gold, right? Pure gold. Inside and outside, you shall cover it. So he says, if I'm understanding what he's saying correctly, that when a person's approach to Torah has to be, the gold has to be internal and also external. Now, logically, you would say that means in the way you reflect on, you have to be Tocha Kabara, inside as you are outside. But he says something else which is fascinating. He says also to be concerned, ba'ad b'nei beiso, for one's own house, one's own family, one's own children. And I think what he means is, sometimes you can be tempted to project or promote the Torah outside, to teach, outside, right? Either teaching Torah or just, it's not in the home. And he says, that the gold has to be inside as well as outside. That it's not just an external thing, but it actually, one looks initially and most importantly at one's own inner circle, one's own family, and says, how is that gold affecting them? Where is the Torah there within those who are closest to me? And then he says, and then he goes on to say other details as well. Why is it that the width of the Aron is wider than the width of the Shulchan? If you look at the width of the Aron is, it's 2.5, right? No, it's Amar and a half, right? Amar v'chitzi rochboi. Whereas if you look at the Shulchan, it says an Amar rochboi. It's only an Amar wide. Why is the Aron wider? And the answer is because there is an idea that in order for the words of a Talmid Chacham to be heard, there has to be a certain breadth, if you like, or nachas, in the sense of breadth of mind, I think, right? Or a person has a peace of mind in order to absorb the absorb the words of the Torah. And he goes on to point out other things, other ideas as well. That are relevant in terms of the adherence and commitment we have to the Torah, which is everything that the Aron represents. There's a very interesting kliyakar. The kliyakar says over here, right? Also at the beginning of the parsha, there's a long kliyakar, and towards 1 second, just find the right bit. So it's on Pasuk. Pasuk Gimel, the Zahav v'Chesed v'Nechoshes. The Kliyakar brings a Medrash Tanchuma. It's the second paragraph after where it says Zahav v'Chesed v'Nechoshes. It's right in the middle. There's a long Kliyakar on Pasuk Gimel, and it's towards the end. The paragraph begins with a Medrash Tanchuma. It's a bit difficult to give any more descriptive features than that. Is that what it is? Yeah. You see where it says a Medrash Tanchuma. I just sort of paraphrase what he says. He says the Medrash Tanchuma says that what are the significance of the Zahav v'Chesed v'Nechoshes? He says the Zahav, the gold, corresponds to the Malchus Bovel, the kingdom of Bovel, because the pasuk says Daniel Ant Reisha the Davo, you have a head of gold. There was a vision. This was a vision that was shown to Nebuchadnezzar. Kesef is Keneged Modai, right? The Median Empire that caused us many problems. Prasu Modai, etc. Kesef, right? With the Megillah, right? With Purim, right? That there was 10,000 kikar kesef, right? There's the whole thing of the Purim story. And Nechoshes connected Malchus Yovan, and copper corresponds to the Malchus Yovan, which is less than all of them. It seems to be lower than all of them in some sense. And then the Medrash carries on and says, what is the Oris Elim Ma'adomim? What is the red? The redness corresponds to Malchus Edom. And Hashem says like this, even though, so these 4 items correspond to the 4 kingdoms that are going to persecute you and cause a problem. I will make a salvation sprout for you from the position of slavery. What does it say afterwards? Shemen lamor, oil. And what is the oil for light? What is the oil for light? That's Moshiach, right? Okay, like we say on Shani Yom Kippur. What do we say? Arichas ner, the Venishai, right? The ner, the idea of light, right? A lamp, yes. Okay. Now the Kliyaka says that many have found this medrash astonishing, and they wondered what is going on? Why is the medrash linking these materials that were donated for the Mishkan to the 4 kingdoms that have oppressed us, and the fact that Mashiach will come and save us? What's going on? And he says that the explanation, he's trying to go into the Medrash, is trying to understand why it is that Hashem showed Nebuchadnezzar all of these 4 kingdoms. And he explained to Nebuchadnezzar, that each one was corresponding to these specific materials that were donated. And why did Hashem do that? Why would Nebuchadnezzar shown, he was such a Rosha, why was he shown these this vision about a vision at all. What was the idea? So just read the next few, in the next paragraph. The purpose was for the benefit of the Bnei Yisrael, so that they should know that we have the potential to be able to stand up against all of these four oppressive kingdoms. They would never be able to destroy the Bnei Yisrael. And the idea, why is this so? So you go through each one. Each one is, it corresponds to a different material that was donated for the Mishkan. And the message is that one mitzvah that we do with Zohov, the donations that were given, that were with gold, the golden donations that were given, that is what will stand up against the kingdom of Bavel. The donation of silver will stand up against the donation of the Persians, right, etc., etc., and then through to all of them, right? What is the message of what I think the Kli Yakar is saying? The Kli Yakar is emphasizing here that one of the key messages of the donations that are given to the Mishkan is the question of how do we focus our energies? What do we use our resources for? And do we use them to the full potential? So perhaps the Medrash is trying to highlight that we don't understand enough just the effect of the power of what we do with what we have, the effect that can have. So the extent that it was the merit of donating these items to the Mishkan was sufficient, right? That was the message that's the message the Medrash is bringing out, to stand up against all of these oppressive regimes that have caused us so many problems. But the zechus we have through donating to the Mishkan in this way is enough. And it's yes, it's preceding. I actually saw a very beautiful idea from Cheskel Weinfeld. He links the what is the connection between Mishpatim and Truma, because Mishpatim ends with Naaseh v'Nishma. So Truma begins v'yikhu li Truma. Okay, so put your money where your mouth is. You know, is it really true? Is it really true that Naaseh v'Nishma, that we will do and we will listen, right? Naaseh v'Nishma. Okay, so prove it. And why do you see that this was such a test for them? Because if you look carefully, you'll see that this is a beautiful thing, very simple idea. The Yikhu li Truma, I can't remember if we quote someone else or not. The Yikhu li Truma, take all these donations, all of these donations, and only afterwards, in other words, the idea being, they don't even know why. It's the proverbial Naaseh v'Nishma. You don't know why. Only afterwards you will discover the reason for these donations. First come up. I'm telling you this is for a worthwhile cause. Trust me, right? Afterwards I'll tell you what it's for. It's Naaseh v'Nishma, right? You'll understand afterwards. First act, do the right thing, and prove it by making these donations here. So that's the strength and the power of what these donations can achieve. Another Kli Yakar, Chovov Posuk Tes Vov, very short one, talks about the Arozim, right? So there is a Baal HaTurim, which he kind of comes round to. Chov Vov, the kroshim, the cedar, the cedar wood that was used to construct the beams, right, that surrounded the Mishkan, the Chotzer. So the Kli Yakar says, Chov Vov Posuk. Posuk Tesvav. So first look at the Baal HaTurim. It's a very cryptic Baal HaTurim. The Baal HaTurim says two things. Well, he says a few things. We're just going to highlight two of them. He says, Choftalat pa'omim shittim b'parsha. There are 24 times that the word shittim, which means acacia wood, is used in the parsha, is mentioned in the parsha. Keneged Choftalat elef shenoflu b'shittim, which corresponds to 24,000 who lost their lives b'shittim when they were Mazana, right? When they went with the daughters of Moab, right? Parshas Pinchas. 24 times shittim is mentioned, and we know that 24,000 fell, right? B'shittim, which was the name of the place. So you've got that corresponding, the word, there was a place called Shittim, and here we have 24 times Shittim. Okay, what's one thing got to do with the other? And then the Kli Yakar says, there are 48 kroshim, 48 beams, memches kroshim, connect memches neviim, corresponding to the 48 neviim that are listed in Megillah, memches mishmaras kuna neviim, and the 48 watches of Kohana and Levi. So these are two different ideas, right? The number 48 of the beams corresponds to these people, the Nevi'im, or the watchers of the Kuna Nevi'ah, and the number of times that the word Shittim is mentioned in this section of the parsha corresponds to 24,000 dollars. What is this? What is the meaning of these two these two ideas in the Baal HaTurim? So the Kli Yakar says that we know. Rashi brings the very famous medrash that where did they get this wood from? The wood was planted by Yaakov Avinu. This is Rashi well worth remembering, because you see how familiar Rashi was with piyutim, even the ones that are very rarely said, because Rashi brings as a proof for what he describes. This medrash describes that Yaakov Avinu planted the cedars in Egypt, and he told his children to take them out with him, and he brings a piyut, which is said during Shacharis, for first day Pesach. Rashi brings a piyut, right? That is said in first day, in the Yotzros, the first day Pesach, which many people nowadays don't even say. And he says, you see how familiar he was with it. Tos matam zurozim koresh b'tein ha'orozim, basically saying that we were spurred on, like they should be ready in our hands to in order that we would take them with to create the Mishkan. The Kli Yakar says, second paragraph, according to the explanation that the simple explanation that Yaakov prepared them for, he had another pshat beforehand, that Yaakov prepared them for the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Nuchaloma, we can say, Shekach Oma Oimdim. This is why it says they stood up straight. Loma sheyikhu me'oy should take me'oson atzei shittim ha'oimdim muchonim lekach. They should take from those cedar wood, which were prepared and ready for this. Kizeo mashmos loshen oimdim b'harbi makomus. This is what it means to stand up straight. It's something that's ready for that purpose. And now he comes on to the remes. What is the hint in the fact that they were standing up straight? Because the Pasuk says in Tehillim, Tzadik katoma yifrach ke'erez balavon yiskeh, right? The idea of a tzaddik flowering like a date palm, and standing up and being like an erez balavono, right? Like a cedar in the Lebanon, yeah. Which I think needs to raise up high or whatever. Because the tzaddik, a righteous person, is compared to the cedar. So Hashem placed His divine presence, the Shekhinah, inside, so to speak, a mechitza, an enclosed space, kaviyachol, of atzei arozim, of cedar words. Lilmoid b'kal v'chomer, to learn a kal v'chomer, that we should learn a kal v'chomer, that he also dwells amongst the Bnei Yisrael who are compared to cedars, as it says, I will dwell amongst them, not amongst it, amongst them. The Shekhinah primarily is for the Bnei Yisrael, and he says that's why the Baal HaTurim says the 48 Koroshim, the beams, correspond to the 48 Nevi'im and the 48 watchers of Kuna Nevi'ah, right? Because this is the epitome of, or meant to be, tzaddikim. The idea of the tzaddik, the Nevi'im are righteous, and so are those who have the mishmaros of the Kuna and Leviah, the watches in the Beis Hamikdash of the Kuna and the Leviah. What is the Kli Yakar conveying here? The Kli Yakar is conveying that the message of the Mishkan is never to lose sight of our own potential, of our own strength, of the fact that when we look at those beams standing straight, we remember that ke'erez balavono, that someone who is righteous stands up as tall as cedar wood. And it's a kal v'chomer. If Hashem will already rest His Shekhinah in the Beis Hamikdash, right? How much more so will He dwell amongst the Bnei Yisrael? And with that, the Kli Yakar explains the other line, this cryptic reference to the 24,000 who fell with the daughters of Moab, and the 24 times Shittim is mentioned. He says, Bnos Midian, yes, yeah, in Pinchas, yeah, exactly. Fair enough, thank you. Yes. Now he says like this: Shekol mokum, shetimsa geder erva, shom timsa kedusha. you'll find kedusha whenever you have a boundary against immorality. And since in Shittim, in that place, they had no boundaries, sadly, and that's what went wrong, right? And they didn't remember these 24 beams in the context of the Mishkan, which had that degree of sanctity. Therefore, 24,000 fell. Now, the Kliyaka doesn't spell out exactly. It just seems to make the link between, if a person wants to understand what it means to live a structured life, okay, a way that has a barrier against immorality, okay, that's where you need to look for a place of kedusha, right? You need to look for a place of sanctity. And had they remembered the sanctity of the Mishkan, they would never have done what they do. But I think the way to understand perhaps the Kliyaka is that the two ideas are linked, the two themes. Because what would have been the best way and the greatest barrier against falling into the trap of immorality and the trap that was set for them by Balak, if they remembered their own spiritual strength. In other words, what are these cedars, what are the kroshim, the beams, omdim represent? They represent a person who is able to stand up and be strong in their own moral values. That's the idea of that you mentioned before, in terms of the, that you should learn from it a kal v'chomer. If Hashem will rest here, how much more so he'll rest on the righteous, on the tzaddikim, the people who are tzaddikim, right? So too, perhaps that's also why there is this deep connection between the 24 times that the word shittim is mentioned and the 24,000 who lost their lives. Because what the trap they fell into was not realizing that they had themselves the own potential to stay upright and strong as the beams were in the Mishkan. But unfortunately, because they didn't, and because they lost that, and they lost that sensitivity and that commitment, therefore that's also why they fell into the trap, and it went with disastrous consequences. Rav Hirsch similarly says, I don't have time to really see this because we're kind of out of time, but Rav Hirsch says, just very briefly at the end of the parsha, which very much links to this, he says you'll notice throughout the Mishkan a focus on things that are square. You notice that? There are some exceptions. The kiyar is round, but mostly it's right. But mostly it's square. Yeah, the R and everything's square. Right? Rovua yiyeh, it says with the mizbeach at the end of the parsha. Right? What is Rovua? What does it say? A minute. Rovua yiyeh mizbeach. Yeah, the mizbeach has to be square. It's really emphasized that, right? It's emphasized that it has to be square. What is the idea of the squareness? Why is the squareness so significant? So he says the answer is because anything that is fashioned by nature, by a force of nature, by organic forces, is not exactly square. It's impossible. It cannot be exactly square. It's got different curves, and it's organic, right? It doesn't have this thing, right? He says the free, if self-limiting force of a person who has bechira, who has choice, can create and build in straight lines, right? Straight lines and angles. Only a human being can do that. So the idea, he says, is the circle, right, is the realm of like compulsion, subjugation, doing things without thought, no, unstructured. The square is structure. And therefore, and that is why he says the rectangle is the mark of Tara. He links it, I think, to tefillin, where he refers you to an essay on tefillin, which is the most square of all. The tefillin have to be square. Have to be square. What is that? A square? Why do we have to be square? And the answer is because the essence of what the Mishkan is meant to achieve is to understand that we need to live lives of structure, and that structure brings meaning to life. Right? And the squareness, rather than being something that's restrictive, it's something liberating. And it is the circle and the idea of just come as you go and free as you go, right? That leads to a person living a life which is empty. And the structure is what really counts. And it's that it's not the squareness of the mizbeach is what facilitates its meaning. It's something which we can only do through exercising our own bechira. The Mishkan had to be created, had to be formed, right, in this way. And I think that's a very powerful idea. There's more directions and ways he takes that, but for now, it's enough just to open the subject. Okay. Okay. Have a good Shabbos.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, good Shabbos.